Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have with me Alok Govil, who is a seasoned technical leader. Now he's led at Amazon as a principal engineer. Previously, he actually led at Qualcomm, and I know you started, I believe it was one or two companies by yourself, which is very, very interesting. So can you tell me, Alok, more from your perspective, your background, and really what led you to Amazon and the work you're doing today?
Absolutely, Aaron. So first off, Aaron, thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time for running this entire series. I do very much agree with one of the things you have mentioned, which is there's a gap between what the industry wants, what careers people want to have, and what academia obviously sometimes it focuses on. And students end up having lack of clarity on how to proceed, and sometimes getting uh, surprises when they actually start working in the industry. So kind of bridging the gap is basically helpful for a lot of people basically there. So I sincerely appreciate your efforts, right?
Certainly.
So coming back to me, so my background, I'm hardcore technologist. Interestingly, I was started with technology and sciences back when I was merely 6 years old by my father. So he started
Wow.
teaching me electrical engineering, electronics engineering, stuff about how stuff works around and so on. And then when I was merely 10 years old, right, he brought me what is by today's standard a rudimentary computer, but it was very, very good machine. Right, I started programming when I was basically 10 years old and developed basically. So in a sense, as I think we all would know, starting early in age, kind of brings that thing into your own character, whether you're learning music, whether you're learning business, economics, geography, whatnot, right? So similar thing happened to me via my father in terms of technology. So starting at that early age meant any other child, I would be asking questions which even adults wouldn't actually ask. Because you get used to the status quo, you don't challenge the things that are around you, right? But as a kid, I didn't know any better. So I ended up basically asking original questions, asking challenging things, and so on. And then one of the things I used to be doing at that point in time, that was I think it was around seventh grade. Right, I also started basically sometimes getting a feel that some of the stuff we are taught is actually not correct. Right, so things which were basically prescribed, which were not really explained in terms of why things are the way they are. So one of the things I started doing at that age was I started maintaining a diary. I still actually have it, right, where I would put basically down questions where I wouldn't know the answer to. And often I wouldn't find the answers to those questions, but I would maintain those as questions with me. Right. And I think basically that early approach has shaped me a lot in terms of what I have basically done going forward, what I want to do, and so on. And things that come is basically whenever I come across some problem, business problem, life problem, whatever, I try to reason from fundamentals around it, asking basic questions, taking a step back on what are we actually trying to do, right? And while basically working on that, I made a kind of a tenet for myself that even when I'm working on the finest of the details, I would not lose that big picture. I do
Yes.
still basically sometimes, but so trying to basically maintain that entire breadth and depth, detail as well as
Throughout the
big picture,
process.
yeah, is what I think has shaped me over the time, and going through it basically over and over again has allowed me to basically make it a second nature for me. So now basically coming to answering your question with that, right? So with technology, with basically science, with everything else too, I've always really tried to see, hey, what makes sense to do. I challenge basically that more than how should something be done, right? And as a result, many of my projects, even in my workplace, have been self-initiated, where I was basically saying, hey, why shouldn't we do things that way? And if I don't get an answer, sooner or later, things would actually start going in that direction, right? Because if people don't have an answer, they are not conspiring against you. They are also trying to solve problems, right? And if they hear
Absolutely.
ideas, they hear questions which they don't have an answer to, it ultimately ends up shaping basically them as well. So now, basically, somewhere around in 2010, a friend of mine introduced me to startup world, entrepreneurship, right? And I started reading basically about that. Meanwhile, I used to have a lot of my own ideas, anyways, right? So that was the time when, well, so I'll backtrack again once more, right? So when I was again 10 years old, right, that was the first time when I saw a computer program playing chess. right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of a revelation for me. Hey, it's a machine which is doing an intelligence task, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to today's world, AI is a lot more common, and we are basically halfway accepting basically that yeah, machines can be intelligent too, but kind
Mm-hmm.
of that chess thing has been around for like decades now, right? So
Yes.
that was basically my starting point into like AI, and that was something I wanted to do generally.
Mm-hmm.
My goal continues to be understanding how even human brain, how human consciousness, how human psyche, etc. like works, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's driven by a lot of it is driven by trying to understand oneself, trying to understand ourselves, and likewise making sense of the rest of the world around basically us, right? So that is my starting point. So 2010 I started basically thinking of, hey, I want to learn more artificial intelligence, I want to basically do some work basically in that. But in the industry, I was not getting that opportunity. Started
Mm-hmm.
working on that like myself, using my own time and so on. So I think starting 2010, I took first formal course in AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
By 2013, I felt that I was self-claimed, but I was an expert in the field because I knew pretty much everything that was coming across, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some professor does some research, and I could immediately connect. Yeah, basically this professor research has this significance,
Very
and
forward thinking.
yeah, this is how it relates to everything else that is happening, and so on. So 2013, I took the plunge. I thought basically, hey, I want to do some of my own basically work. Started having had big dreams, including something like ChatGPT at that point in time. I don't think I was positioned to basically do it for multiple reasons, right? Because the type of training effort, machine learning, training data it needs, training investment it needs, I certainly did not
It's
have.
massive. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but even at that time, I was downloading entire Wikipedia on my own personal laptop right here in front of me, right? And used to be try to train neural networks on Wikipedia, trying to build something like ChatGPT, right? My efforts didn't go anywhere, but it still basically did shape me a lot. It changed
The
me a
right
lot.
thesis.
Yeah, because like it opens you up into basically asking even more questions and challenge the
Mm-hmm.
status quo and why things can and cannot be and so on, right? So I think that's how it basically unfolded. Shortly after basically that, so my own efforts really didn't succeed because I didn't had the right opportunity, I would say, basically to be able to do things at scale.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, I then joined Amazon Alexa team, and that basically I thought was second to the chance for me to basically do the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although it didn't turn out to be basically that way, but nevertheless, I spent several years at Amazon honing more AI skills, learning more stuff, simplifying things, which, as I explained, like I have been trying to learn these things from childhood and so on. So my approach is always to find the simplicity in complexity. If I can't
Mm-hmm.
explain things in simple terms, I don't think I feel I have understood it. And then
Mm-hmm.
basically, I think I actually haven't understood it, right? So that's how
Mm-hmm.
basically I've been able to focus basically my entire career being simplifying things, solving problems, and like so on.
Very good. So the time you spent at Amazon, I want to first address this particular aspect of your career, and then we'll discuss a bit later about your perspectives on how things are changing now. But at first, I've talked to a lot of principal engineers, and for most of them, there hits a point in their career in which they see that the technical work is absolutely valuable. It's a bridge to making successful outcomes. But another perspective that's very relevant is the business and enterprise outcome you're trying to create. So was there a particular point in your career in which you noticed that this was actually a relevant thing that's very important to connect to your technical work?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think I'll give again one backstory, which was a moment
Mhm.
for me, right? So kind of as I mentioned, like I started early childhood asking questions for myself primarily, right?
Yeah.
So for basically good deal of my career, I used to basically see myself as the first customer,
Hmm.
right? And then I think in my first job in the United States, that was at Philips Research, my boss,
Hmm.
who I still respect a lot, right? He pushed
Hmm.
me into taking a project for medical devices, right? And at that time, I was disconnected. Okay, like I don't feel connected to this particular solving that particular problem, right? But
Yeah.
he pushed me into it, and I worked on it, and I actually enjoyed it. And that is when I first learned how to put yourself in the shoes of a customer who's not you,
Mm. Hmm.
right? So think from point of view of customer who is basically very different persona than basically what you might be, maybe very different taste, maybe very different
Yes.
backgrounds from what you are. And that basically was again a shape changer basically for me, right? Now coming to basically Amazon, again, similar thing like happened. So, and it comes along when you grow in your career anyways, because you can't be solving just pure techie problems, right? You have to basically
Mhm.
like connect with the business side as well. So I've been starting to really think about not only from business, but even broader society standpoint. Okay, what does humankind basically need in the current
Mhm.
stages, right?
Mhm.
What is it that can help solve the problem which are like widely basically there, but people
Mhm.
are basically struggling with it, getting frustrated by those, and not recognizing that they could be solved
Yeah.
via some
Yes.
innovation. Right, so that's what basically comes along, and as a
And
result, I've been helping shape not only the technology but also what the products should be, how should
yes.
basically business build those products, and like so on.
And that's one of the most difficult things is to create a solution that people don't even themselves realize they actually need. And that's actually one of the most difficult things one of the difficult questions I ask product managers is how do you understand what the customer needs versus what they say they want? Because that's the phenomenon in
Absolutely.
business. So how do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I recall something said by Clive Sinclair, who used to
Hmm.
basically build equipment, machines, and he
Hmm.
used to say, okay, customers don't know it because they don't know what they want, right? So
Yes.
that's where basically this comes. As I mentioned, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the customer, think from
Hmm.
their standpoint, things from basically their mental model, right? And
Hmm.
be able to basically say, hey, what would solve the problem they are facing, right?
Hmm.
For that, customer feedback becomes important because
Hmm.
that's how that's your channel basically into understanding what the customer needs
Hmm.
are. But it's not
The
core.
adult answer. It's not the whole
It's
answer.
not the final answer. It's your path to basically hit, to observe them, to see basically what they're facing, to understand basically there's this thing, right? But what they say is kind of a hint. It's not to be taken at face value, right?
Hmm.
That is the trick. And once you basically understand what customers basically want, then you can start building it, thinking it through. Again, asking yourself challenging question: does it really solve the customer problem? Does it not?
Hmm. Hmm.
Often basically I think things start going wrong at that point itself, where product managers or like leaders or even technology folks start misunderstanding what the customer actually needs and solving the problem, and then
Hmm.
basically after that point you can only be going downhill because you're in going in the wrong direction from where you should be
Hmm.
going.
Right. And with this particular approach, there's always going to be a calculated risk involved. If you even look at mergers and acquisitions, there's always calculated risk involved in the process, including the Skype. I think Skype was acquired by eBay in 2005, and that was an unsuccessful merger because the original thesis is that Skype would allow the people selling and buying on eBay to basically communicate better. But you can't detect or you can't predict human behavior. And that component was the reason why it was an unsuccessful merger. So no matter what you do, if you're trying to create an innovative solution, there's always a degree of calculated risk involved. Now, to
Right.
progress this conversation a little bit forward, I was really curious about how that change in understanding the importance of customer needs shifted how you look at your technical work. What changed in how you looked at your technical work at that point?
Right. So core basically always was there are problems you face, right? And you ask, is it right problem to solve or not?
Hmm.
Right. There's one, so kind of like as I mentioned, I started with technology very early on. So kind of technical curiosity in itself a thing for me, right?
Hmm.
But it's not worthy of investment just based on technical curiosity, right? So one
Hmm.
needs to be able to separate, okay, am I pursuing this because it's fun? Am I pursuing it because it's a cool thing to work on? Or is
Hmm.
it actually solving some customer problem,
Right.
right? Often basically it happens even today, right? It repeats, right? People want to jump to using AI to solve any problem, right?
Hmm.
Because it's cool. It is a new thing people everybody wants to work on, right? But is
Agreed.
it the right answer to solving the customer problem? Maybe, but not necessarily, right? That is the
Exactly.
core
Yeah.
thing. You have to separate out basically what is technical thing from what is business thing. And once you have that clarity of thought, you can ask the right questions and proceed in the right direction.
You
I
made a
like,
very good point about
yeah.
AI, and I apologize for interrupting you, but there's a lot of people utilizing AI because it's trendy. But is it creating enterprise value? Is it creating an actual bit? Is it solving a business problem and actually making tangible business outcomes with the leverage of AI? Or is it something you're using because you want to claim that you're using it? I think that's a very important distinction you made that also ties back to how technical work can actually advance business outcomes, but the business outcomes should be the North Star to how you do your technical work, from what I was
Absolutely.
understanding from other conversations. But please, you're saying
Absolutely.
something.
So even now, basically, this thing happens that people come to me and saying, "Okay, this problem is there, and we need to do innovation to solve it."
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like, asking, okay, I don't think it needs innovation yet, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think it can be solved with the existing state of the art, right? So
Mm-hmm.
why do you need to
Exactly.
innovate, right? And so people sometimes come, okay, like you need to come up with some inventions to basically solve it. But like, no, if it can be solved with the existing state of the art, then having
Mm-hmm.
inventions to basically do it is actually wasteful,
Right.
right? Why to do it, right? So many problems are there because they are people problems, because they are
Mm-hmm.
like kind of misunderstandings, because they're miscommunications, and
Mm-hmm.
not really something for which technology can come in and help.
And this is why principal engineers, I think, have a very difficult job because you're bridging the technical work to the business outcomes, right? So
Absolutely.
that also involves you leading other engineers beneath you or under you. My apologies, under you. So my question for you is, when you're leading these new engineers, how do you approach basically leading them to focus on the bigger picture? Because I know that's something you've done for a large part of your career, is focusing on the bigger picture of things.
Right. Absolutely, Aaron. So I think this is absolutely right question to basically ask. So what happens is like from day to day, basically examples, right? Teams would approach me. I would basically look at the problem. I start basically asking some questions, right?
Mhm.
Often I may know the answers to them, but I'll still basically put it as a question to basically get them to reason like about it, right?
Yes.
And often basically they have come back to me and mentioned that, hey, Alok, merely talking to you helped us simplify the problem, right? And
I
what
cannot
was
believe this is such a great. I just want to say one thing. That was such a very good tactic you're using about asking the right question. Because when
right?
you get them to independently come up with their own conclusion about based on the question you ask, you give them the right perspective without telling them that. I think that's such a smart
Exactly.
way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And once basically the problem is better understood, then those
Hmm.
engineers are themselves on the route to solving them. Because again, as I
Right.
mentioned, there are no malintentions anywhere. Even if some engineer is saying, okay, I want to work on this cool thing, they're really trying to basically solve that problem still,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And once they realize, okay, problem is slightly different than what the technology would basically solve, they would basically
Hmm.
work their way around and solve it and move on,
Hmm.
right? Because
Hmm.
that's so I think the core is basically comes down to understanding the problem and basically showing them, okay, what the real thing is, right? What the real challenges are, how basically how to think long term and so on. Rest of
Hmm.
it basically in my view ends up coming by itself. Now, I'll
Hmm.
mention basically one more big thing you mentioned, which is
Yes.
it's not just basically about coaching these engineers. It's often about
Hmm.
coaching the upward leadership basically as well, and that basically often is more challenging than coaching engineers
Hmm.
in my experience.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. So why do you think leaders are more difficult to coach than the actual engineers themselves?
Well, one, because you are working with your seniors, they
Hmm.
are basically more experienced than basically
Hmm.
you. So you
Hmm.
have to kind of not ignore what they're saying. You can't override what they're saying because like there may be a bigger truth than what even I may basically realize. Right.
Right.
So kind of the challenge becomes internal. It's not about basically just telling them. It's about, okay, am I sure? Am I doubly sure that I understand what they are saying correctly?
Hmm. Yeah.
Right, to juniors basically I would have it less often because I'll be able to see bigger more basically than them,
Hmm.
simply because of experience, right? But
Yeah.
when I'm talking to people who are more experienced than me, the reverse applies, right? So that's why kind of challenge comes from me. Okay, am I understanding it right? Am I basically what I'm telling them, is it actually like correct, right? So once basically it is, then you basically start telling them. Some of them may not basically get it in one shot, but often they are again trying to solve the bigger problems, right? So sooner or later they will.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So what I'd like to do is ask really about your approach to people leadership itself. Now, I know you had a lot of time and experience as not only as an engineer, but you were a founder. And I would also say that for a lot of principal engineers I've had the chance of talking to, there was a shift in really skill set that requires to understand how to lead people in general. So when you were first approached with having to lead teams, when was that point and how did you take on that task? Because that was probably something you're not fully accustomed to before.
Yeah, absolutely. I recall basically a couple instances where I probably first time around I didn't do it well, but soon I
Hmm.
basically learned from it, right?
Yeah.
So one example I recall when I was first made the team lead, right? I used to basically benchmark against, say, because I would start by having a good understanding of the problem, right? Because
Hmm.
like I'm being made the team lead for a reason, right? So now basically when the junior members basically come, I would assume they would also have similar understanding, but they may not, right? They
Mm-hmm.
may have different goals. They may be wanting to learn something new. They may be wanting to work on some specific project and like whatnot, right? So I used to basically start thinking, okay, like, hey, this is what is needed to solve that problem, but I would
Mm-hmm.
often be underestimating, right? Because like the people aspects, the learning curve, all those things basically play a role, right? And that was basically my first big thing. So when I started working, my first manager's advice to me was, hey, Alok, whatever projects you're estimating, hey, this thing you think would take this much effort, he used to say it's rule of pi multiplied by 3,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I used to wonder, hey, like, why would it take 3x basically more than what I'm estimating? Because I think it can be done in basically that time, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Sometimes I was right, often I was not, right? So
Mm-hmm.
those were basically some of the first things because I learned, right? Another thing that happened was first time like one intern actually approached me asking about some problem, right? And I observed that it had become a repeat behavior. He would face some problems, he would ask people around and solve it, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
get and move on, right? And I realized basically it's not working really, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I told him, hey, I can tell you the answer in 5 minutes, right? But I would actually not. I would rather like you to spend next 24 hours thinking through it, trying to work it out, and such that he does not feel bad. I actually told him, think of it as company's investment into your skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's company's time which is basically getting lost. Those 24 hours is not only time loss, it's also opportunity cost lost, right?
Yes.
But basically,
Yes.
I'm making a decision on behalf of the company. We want you to learn yourself. We want you
Mm-hmm.
to be able to become a better engineer to solve problems yourself, right? So even
Mm-hmm.
though I could tell you the answer in 5 minutes, I won't, right? And we said, like, come back, think through it, come back 24 hours later, tell me what you're thinking. We will discuss, and then we will see what to do next, right? Guess what? He came around 11 a.m. something next morning, and he had worked it out,
Yeah.
right? And that was
Yeah.
again the learning for me that, hey, basically it feels like 5 minutes got turned into 24 hours is wasteful, but it's not, because it's an investment into the
It's a
future.
permanent solution or a
It's a
long-term
permanent
solution.
solution. It's investment into the future. Now the person is basically trained, right? So they will basically solve problems faster, better in the future, right?
Yeah.
So that's what. Those were, I think, two examples I basically remember from those times, which kind of like drastically changed how I think about things in working with people.
And a lot of your thinking process is a long-term perspective. What will happen from this action long-term, and that's really what guides
Exactly.
a lot of the actions and thinking process you have, which I can really appreciate. So this is what is actually really interesting to ask now, because we were on the topic of people leadership and, of course, leading other engineers. We have AI now in the mix. We have other coding tools. We have other AI agentic agents. How do you think that's going to change teams going forward when it comes to engineers and principal engineers?
Right. So I think AI is obviously bringing some radical shifts in the way things are like going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to like anticipate what exactly, even though I'm very opinionated about that. As I mentioned, in 2013, I was having all these visions like myself, right?
Yeah.
But basically, like, thing to do is this isn't first time such a shift is like happening. Industrial
Mm-hmm.
revolutions happened before. Internet came along, right? People's professions had to basically go through changes like over and over again, right? I think similar shift is basically happening. We tend to get worried what will happen to the jobs getting lost and so on. But to me, what is changing is really the skill profiles,
Mm-hmm.
right? Kind of like the way I see it, automation will, AI, automation, whatever we are doing, right? It will happen if and only if it will bring advances to humankind. Otherwise, it
Mm-hmm.
won't happen. One way or the other, it won't, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one thing I recommend everyone to do is to basically not fight it, but rather get along with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Skill profiles are changing. Yes, hop along, right? This isn't something new. It may be feeling new to some engineers, those engineers, but it's nothing new. People
Right.
have to basically struggle to make a living. That's the norm. That's not like oddity. That's the norm, right?
Agreed.
And it kind
Yeah.
of like for us to basically it is to be going to be like that, right? So in that basically sense, we have to adapt. We have to adapt to the new world. Things are changing. AI does some things well, some things it does not do well. We have to understand where it works well, how it may proceed going forward, place some bets around it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Future is something nobody comes with basically knowing. We may have some anticipation on it. An analogy I talked about is going to the future is like walking backwards. You only see your past, which is in your front. You can
Mm-hmm.
anticipate what's behind you based on what you see, but you don't really know what's behind you. right?
Yeah.
So it is like that. It's same for me, same for Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs claimed basically his horizon into future is 3 years. And I was thinking,
Hmm.
dude, like these 3 years for me too, right? So how is
Yeah.
Steve Jobs any different? And my answer
Hmm.
was basically, hey, he's obviously a very charismatic person, visionary, and so on. But he faced the same challenge. It's the same for
Hmm.
us. And we are not
Yes.
different. Right? So we have to basically think through that, let go basically of those things, adapt, keep on moving on, use AI, not be left
Hmm.
behind, think of what's working well, think of not working well, think of what new problems can be solved in different ways that were not
Hmm.
solvable before. There's plenty of problems in the world still that can
So
be solved.
being fluid and adaptive to the times is very critical, and thinking about how this will impact long term and what are the new problems that need to be solved now with the use of AI. I think that's a very important
Absolutely,
perspective. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's why I basically stress a lot on fundamentals, right? So kind of like fundamentals don't shift, right? I'll tell you one
Hmm.
thing, Aryan, right? So
Yeah.
100 years down the road, things will be a lot different. But
Hmm.
as much as humans are there, we'll still be eating food. Trees would
Hmm.
still be around. Sky would probably still be there. These are fundamentals. These don't change,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. I
Similarly,
can definitely
laws of
appreciate that.
physics, laws of math, basics don't change, right? So our anchor in this shifting dynamics is basically those fundamentals. Stick
Hmm.
on to that. Keep on basically moving around basically those, and we'll just be fine.
Yes, absolutely. And the technology amplifies things, but the fundamentals stay the same. So I can appreciate that. Now, one last question I have for you, which is going to be on the personal side, is for the concluding part of the conversation, is what is something about your life that you wish more people knew about?
Awesome question. Let me really
Mhm.
think through that.
Yes, it's one of the most difficult questions I ask every person actually.
I think core thing that would come about to be would be asking the right questions and challenging the status quo. It's
Hmm.
something I got started on. I happened to got started on early on because of various my father introducing me to this stuff, and then
Hmm.
jaundice happening to me, which some say basically changes how your brain works and so on, right?
Hmm.
But kind of, I think that is a thing that has shaped me a lot. So I tend to really think big, so big. I am thinking often, even while doing regular things, thinking in terms of universe scale, thinking in terms of
Hmm.
like evolution, like all along for billions of years and so on, right? And
Hmm.
that has basically led me to let go of the conventional basically beliefs and sometimes end up
Hmm.
solving problems with simple solutions which others missed seeing.
Hmm.
But I felt I was doing not doing anything special. I was really just thinking, hey, this is a problem. Why can't we really just solve it this way? Right? Reason
Hmm.
why it was often visible to me and not to others is simply because I was thinking besides the status quo. I was
Hmm.
always reasoning
Okay.
from those first principles. Right? I
So
think
you figure out what's the truth of the problem and what are some other ways we can solve that truth of the problem.
yeah, so asking the right questions, bigger questions, basically, they are constantly in your mind. Even if you couldn't answer those, prepares you basically to do it in the right way.
Mm.
So I
Mhm.
often basically also think about religions, think about like what is we consider right versus wrong, what is basically like God, philosophy, all those bigger perspectives, right?
Mhm.
Often I don't know the answers, which is fine. I maintain those questions within me, right?
Mhm.
But sort of that is, I think, key thing that like helps. So I'll give you another analogy. At times, basically, I've faced challenging times. Happens to everyone,
Mhm.
right?
Of
And
course.
one of the things I've found basically helping me is like standing before a tree or looking at the stars, right? And then basically that ends up giving me or grounding me again to the bigger perspectives, right? Some of the trees around, believe it or not, have been there for 10,000 years. And when you
Mhm.
think about it, that means basically that tree has seen in a this manner, right?
Right.
Euphemism manner, right? Seen humankind grow from practically monkeys to basically where we are today,
Mhm.
right? It has all happened in front of those trees, right? And sort of basically when we look at that big picture, I think our perspective really can change. Some of the
Yes.
things we basically argue about would basically go away, right? Some of the way we solve problems may basically drastically change if we keep that
Mhm.
big picture in mind. I think
Exactly.
that would be the core thing which has happened to me from childhood, which I think I wish basically would be like more widespread.
Oh, love it. Well, Alok, where can people learn more about you and the work you're doing? Is LinkedIn the best place?
LinkedIn and following me on LinkedIn is would need be the best place. Another would be just reaching out to me. I'm very open to basically supporting. I talk to like a lot of people. I always support efforts like yours, Aaron.
Of course.
I've done those basically before, and
And
similarly,
we appreciate it and certainly
Yeah.
appreciate it. So I really appreciate you for coming on. This is an absolute pleasure. Make sure to follow Alok on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining me again. This is Aryan Mohindra and Alok Govil. Thank you for listening.